Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cuppa with Craig. And today we're going to be talking about Nigel Farage. He is sliding in the polls. Have people had enough? Let's find out. So yeah, it's Cuppa with Craig. This is unedited. Maybe I might put a little few graphics in here just to explain some of the things I'm talking about. But today we're going to kick back. We're going to have a cup of tea. We're going to have a cup of coffee, whatever you fancy. Go and chill out. Put your feet up. We're going to get into it because there's lots going on, man. There's lots going on. Nigel Farage isn't having a great time at the minute, right? There's lots of different things going on. But one of the indicators of this anyway, is polling. And all of the polling that's coming out at the minute, and there's lots of it, is showing that Nigel Farage and Reform UK are getting worse and worse, less and less popular, and Labour are getting more and more popular. And for the first time since the election, pretty much, Labour are leading in all of the polls, which is a massive difference compared to where we were a couple of months ago when Keir Starmer was the Prime Minister, which we'll sort of get into because that's maybe one of the reasons why this is all happening. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a by-election coming up, right? There's a by-election coming up. It is the 11th today. The by-election is on the 13th, I think. So it's Tuesday today. It's on Thursday, the Clacton by-election. And I mean, there's a list of 30 odd candidates running, Nigel Farage being one of them, in what looks to be his main competition, Count Binface, which, not a good look for Nigel Farage. And funnily enough, on that, actually, there was reports coming out yesterday that Nigel Farage and his team believed that when he resigned from Parliament, which triggered this by-election, that the investigation into his £5 million backhanders would have been scrapped and cancelled. So is there a bit of an egg on his face? Is he a bit concerned about that? Because, if he triggered this by-election purely just to get rid of that investigation, that's not happening. He's obviously fearing what's going to happen with that investigation to start with. So, it looks likely, let's be realistic, it looks likely that he's going to win the Clacton by-election. Still, the whole process has been incredibly embarrassing for him because quite shrewdly, all of the other parties said, we're not getting involved in this. It's a circus. It's a stunt, which it is. And if another by-election is triggered a few months down the line, whenever it may be, when this investigation's finished, the people of Clacton are going to be left with that choice again of Nigel Farage, who's put them through all of this mess, who's costing the taxpayer money, and, all these other parties who'll be trying to fight for their votes. So it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens. But the backdrop to all that, right, is this polling that's coming out. And that's what I want to get into today. Because, there's a few things going on. There's the polling, which shows Nigel Farage is sinking, Andy Burnham's rising, or at least the parties, Reform and Labour. But then also there's all these press conferences that Nigel Farage has been coming out with. And it reeks of desperation to me. I'll be totally honest. It reeks of desperation, or at best, opportunism. And this is what he seems to do, right, Nigel Farage. So, just the other day, I think actually it was off the Ceuta, I don't know how you say it properly, Ceuta, the little Spanish province on the northern coast of Africa there. Obviously, I think everyone who's watching this will be aware of what happened, where it was something like 60,000 people crashed the border into Spain, and there was a whole migrant crisis kicking off. There's a lot to go into with that, by the way, because there's more than meets the eye just with that. But obviously, Nigel Farage sees that. Zia Youssef sees that, and they're like, let's rub our hands together here, and let's capitalise on the situation, just like what he did with Anne Widdecombe's death. He's still doing that literally just yesterday, I believe. Another point that I'll come to. But what do they do? There's a crisis, okay? There's an issue, and immediately send out Zia Youssef, call a press conference. We are going to, we're going to bring in some policies that would stop this. And I think at the time it was, what did they actually say? I've got some of the stuff here, actually. Oh, that's what it was. They came out of the press conference and said, "Oh, we're going to use the Navy to stop small boats," because obviously everyone's worried about immigration when this thing happened in Ceuta. Apologies if I'm saying that wrong, but I'm going to continue to say Ceuta. Everyone's worried about what happened in Ceuta, all of these people coming across the border, which wasn't good, by the way. I don't think anybody thinks that's good to see 60,000 people crashing the border all at once. You know, like I said, there was probably, I think, by the sounds of things, there was a lot more going on than meets the eye. I think there was a lot of, there may have been some communications going on trying to encourage people to hit the border all at the same time, but I'm not going to get into that today. So yeah, Nigel Farage, as always, the opportunist, thinks, right, people are concerned about immigration right now. Let's come out with a talking point. Let's come out with some eye-catching bit of policy, despite it being nonsense. We'll get onto that. Let's use the Royal Navy. Let's use the Royal Navy to stop small boats across the English Channel. Right now, look, that seems, doesn't it? Or when just at first glance, I'm ex-RAF, so I know a little bit about how the armed forces operate. It seems like, all right, okay, no nonsense approach. No nonsense approach. He's going to use the Navy, the Royal Navy, experienced, our senior service. They're not going to let people cross. We fought world wars and whatever, the Spanish Armada, and they're going to stop some small boats. But it's not as easy as that. And he knows that. Nigel Farage knows fine well that actually we've even tried to use the Royal Navy to stop this before. And all it was, right, it was actually the Boris Johnson that tried this. They used the Royal Navy to try and stop small boats, and it became the world's most expensive small boat taxi, basically. Small boat escort, whatever you want to call it. Because there's international law, there's maritime law, there's all these different things that the Royal Navy have to stick to, and they're not going to break the law for Nigel Farage. They are not going to break maritime law. The Royal Navy respect that, right? And there's been people out of the Navy, there's been people in the military who've already come out and opposed this plan, and it's just more populist bullshit. It's just this, like, all he cares about is the headline, because all he wants is the vote. He doesn't care about if his policies will actually work or not. He just wants your vote. So by the time you voted for him and he gets the Royal Navy in and it fails, it doesn't matter because he's already in power, right? But yeah, that system just won't work. And he knows that. Actually, I made a video about this. He knows this because he actually tweeted at the time. I think this is probably, was it like 2020 or something? Boris Johnson, probably around there, but maybe probably not during COVID. I don't know. Good few years back now, obviously, like I said, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And he made a tweet about it, moaning about how bad it was. It was a waste of resources, a waste of the Royal Navy's time, and they were doing essentially exactly the same as what the RNLI are capable of doing, which is making sure that people don't drown when crossing the channel, which I'm all for. I'm not here trying to advocate for small boats, because nobody wants to see small boats crossing the channel. I certainly don't. So that's the thing, right? Is there's so much rhetoric, so much this narrative from the right. It's like, oh, lefties, whatever. Sick of the whole righty lefty thing. Anyway, but I don't see anybody advocating for small boats, right? Nobody wants to see it. What people want to see is safe and legal routes, so that genuine asylum seekers and refugees, well, you become a refugee once you grant asylum, can safely access the country. Because I don't know about you, right? I don't know about you, but I actually like the idea of putting out a lending hand, a helping hand to people who need it. But that seems to be changing. That seems to be changing because of people like Nigel Farage. And people shouldn't have to risk their lives. People die. People literally die crossing the English Channel on small boats, right? And then they wonder, like, oh, it's all fighting age males, fighting age males. Well, you could call them working age males to start with, right? Because fighting age obviously implies that they're here for a war or a fight, which they're not. Despite, again, all the conspiracy theories, they're here to try and make a bit of money. They're here to try and get a life for themselves, set up somewhere that isn't a war-torn country, somewhere where they're being oppressed, or there's a lot to be said about asylum seekers and whether they should be here. Well, look, if people are willing to cross the English Channel on a small boat, on basically a dinghy, risking their lives, trying to get a better life, all power to them. All power to them. But the point is, if we had safe legal routes, we'd be able to process these people. Because there's another thing, the undocumented males, right? Undocumented. I'm going on a tangent here, but undocumented males, right? Okay, they're undocumented. Why are they undocumented? Because they're coming here on small boats and whatever. They haven't got. If there's safe legal routes, we'd be able to just process these people properly. That's half the. It's the same problem with asylum hotels, right? The reason the immigration bill is so high, the immigration costs are so high, is because we're using asylum hotels. People think that the money that we spend on immigration is going to immigrants. It's not. It's going to third-party contractors who own these hotels, who are making a fortune. They're making an absolute fortune from housing immigrants. But why is that the case? Why is that the case? We shouldn't be allowing them to make profit off that situation. It's a humanitarian issue. But the problem lies in how long it's taken to process these people. Get them processed, get them into the country, get them set up, and get them working. I fully like look. If people are coming to this country, I'm all for encouraging people to work. I think if you can work, should be working. It's good for you, you know. But this whole rhetoric of like, oh, they would all come here just to sponge money off. It's not the case, man. It's not the case. But anyway, I digress. So Nigel Farage wanted to use the Royal Navy. That was my point. And he knows it won't work, but he says it anyway. Opportunism. That's where I was going. And then just this week, more opportunism. This I can't remember the name of the unfortunately remember the name of the police officer that was, basically it was about the early releases from prison, right? And people being released early, and it was difficult, lots of challenges there. Not great. A bit of a, well, not just a bit of a sticky point. Very, very difficult situation to navigate through, right? Especially for Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister. Now, again, Nigel Farage, what does he see? He sees an opportunity for him to come in and be like, right, people are concerned about early releases from prison. People are worried about prisoners, prison capacities. Okay, let me come up with something that's eye-catching. And what does he do? Has a press conference. Saying, what did he say? Basically that he'll send prisoners. I can't remember how many he said. 10,000 prisoners. I think he said he wants to send to El Salvadorian prisons. Again, I mean, look, it's just nonsense, man. It is just nonsense. He's on about what are we talking about here? Why not actually just invest in the prison service? Invest in the prison service, make enough prisons. It's a similar story with like we're 2/3 of the country now, or is it half? I keep having bloody Google stuff. Yeah. Hang on, BBC. 2/3. I was right. Yeah, 2/3 of the country is now in drought. Why is that? Well, because we haven't invested in building reservoirs for decades. So what do we expect? We haven't the majority of the country hasn't had rain. I'm lucky I'm up in the northeast. We've had a bit of rain, so we're not too bad up here. But 2/3 of the country's in drought. It's funny because there's no opportunism there. He doesn't want to address that. He doesn't want to go near immigration. Happy to go near prisons. He's happy to talk about drought. It's been awfully quiet, hasn't he? I wonder why that is. A, because he probably doesn't want to talk about nationalising water. But B, he doesn't want to address the fact that man-made climate change is causing real problems. I mean, it's undeniable. It is undeniable. And that's one of the scary things, right, is that people like Nigel Farage, he's either been enabled or he's enabled, and I don't know which one it is. But there's an interesting thing going on where climate change denial is getting more and more prevalent despite wildfires. The country is burning. Europe is burning. Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh was on fire. I think the New Forest today, they're tackling a massive wildfire. And people are like, oh, well, it's just arsonists. It's just people starting fires. Right, let me address something. Let me just say something right now. Wildfires, yes, typically started by human activity, whether it's farming, combine harvesters, friction, sparks, or in the summer, people using disposable barbecues, having a little fire or chucking a cigarette or whatever it is. But, this is the big but, the conditions required for this levels of wildfires is happening because of man-made climate change. Extremely wet winters, extremely dry summers. So you get lots and lots of vegetation growth in the winter because of the rainfall. And then all of that vegetation dries out, okay? It all dries out. So you've got lots and lots, let's just say grass, lots and lots of grass. and then it all dries out. Okay, so basically you've got huge masses of vegetation, lovely dry kindling, and that's basically what it is. Then something, a match, whatever, a barbecue lights that up, get a bit of wind, and whoosh, away you go. Away you go. Wildfires. Now, if it wasn't for man-made climate change, which is making those conditions more prevalent, you wouldn't have as wet winters. And this is the thing, people are like, oh, it's always been rainy, it's always been rainy. No, there's a difference, right? There's a difference between a miserable winter in the UK and extreme rainfall, which is what we get. Okay, there's literally signs. I'm not supposed to edit these, but I might just put some graphs in here just to show my point. That we're getting wetter and wetter and wetter winters, and we're getting hotter and hotter, drier and drier summers, right? So it's literally, the evidence is there. That is undisputable. So I don't want to hear this. Oh, it was hotter in 1976. Oh, it's always been miserable in the winters. Or oh, remember all the snow we used to get in the right. The science is the statistics are there. We have got measuring devices that prove this stuff is changing. Okay, so let's get past that point. Get past that. Nigel Farage just won't address it. Why? Because he's got interests in big oil and gas. He's got donors who've got interests in oil and gas. So the conversation about the North Sea, the conversation about BP, I don't know exactly who it is. Again, I mean, the information's all there. Just Google these donors, and he wants to keep his mates happy. He wants to keep his mates happy. So despite it, the best interest in you, me, and even workers in the North Sea would be investing in renewables, creating jobs in renewables, right? And making sure that the people who are out in the North Sea rely, not just out in the North Sea actually, but in the supply chains in the UK on home turf. We need to be creating new jobs for those people to go into. And the only way, because no matter what anybody says, North Sea oil and gas is in decline, right? It's in decline. It's getting harder and harder and more expensive to extract it. Now, if you want to talk about new licenses in the North Sea, whatever, I mean, big conversation to have, right? My point would be we need to make sure that the people who rely on those jobs have got jobs to go into, right? So jobs in renewables we have forever because it's renewable. That's the whole point. The wind, the sun, it is renewable. It's always going to be there, right? So we need to be making the things that we need to produce that power from renewable sources in the UK. But right now we're not. The majority of it comes from abroad, whether it be China, whether it be like cables from Greece or wind turbine blades from Europe and all over the place. But even when it comes to the structures that wind turbines are built on, the majority of them come from the Middle East, and that's shipped over here rather than just making stuff in the UK. Now, the jobs exist in renewables. The jobs exist, right? But we aren't competing in the same way that we should be. We've got some jobs here. There's some sites, like there's a wind turbine blade factory in Hull, a big Siemens factory. Providing jobs, lots of good quality jobs, right? But it's nowhere near enough. And this back and forth about net stupid zero is just costing us jobs. It is costing us jobs, and it's costing us like money in terms of our energy bills, because the longer we rely on natural gas, the longer our expensive energy bills are going to continue. And it's so frustrating to see this conversation about energy bills and, oh, net stupid zero is costing us a fortune, energy bills. We've got some green levies and stuff, right? So there is money on energy bills. But they've been in place for a long, long time. Now, you and me both know when energy bills got more expensive, right? In particular moments. During COVID, things got more expensive because supplies were restricted. But a very noticeable jump was when Russia invaded Ukraine, because the supplies of natural gas, what happened? It got scarce. So the price of natural gas went up, which means your energy bills went up, my energy bills went up. And that's because we produce. So when we produce electricity, right, it's called marginal cost pricing. When we produce energy, when we make electricity, right, it's the price comes off the most expensive method used to produce it. And the most expensive method in this country is natural gas, and that's how the prices go up. But then you look at France. I think France is a great example. Their energy bills don't spike as much because they don't rely on the natural gas. So, and then you talk about the North Sea. I mean, that is not going to directly impact your energy bills because what's extracted in the North Sea is just open. The majority of it is just exported abroad, and we buy it all off the international market prices. So, like, if we started making like producing loads and loads and loads of oil and gas from the North Sea, we still have to buy oil and gas off the international markets, and we don't produce enough oil and gas to affect the price of the international markets. We just don't. So it's like, there's conversations to be had about, the jobs in the North Sea by granting new licenses and making sure then the tax that comes back, and there's a conversation to be had there. But this thing that like your energy bills are going to get cheaper if we drill in the North Sea is just not true, not true. But yeah, went off on another tangent there. back to Nigel Farage, because obviously he doesn't want to have that nuanced conversation. It's just expensive energy. Let's drill in the North Sea. It's a much more nuanced conversation than that. But again, he doesn't care. He doesn't care because it's just headlines. All that matters is headlines and being able to capture people's attention. But what's interesting is, despite all of these efforts, right? Because it looks like desperation to me. Despite all of these efforts, he's slipping in the polls, and he's getting worse and worse and worse. He's dropping right off. Now, are people just figuring it out? Or like, how many times I was seeing stories coming out about £5 million backhander, £5 million backhanders. Richard Tice has got investigations going into him now. All sorts of stuff. This George Cotterill and what's he called, Posh George, who was like he's a convicted fraudster. I think for money laundering, and then he sent money to his mum Fiona Cotterill to then give money to Reform, talking like £1 million. I think there's a lot of money. Double check me on that, the exact figures, right? And it's all being investigated. It's all being investigated. Now, the interesting thing is that Nigel Farage, there was reports coming out yesterday that Nigel Farage and his team thought that by triggering this by-election, by resigning, so he resigned as an MP, which triggers a by-election in Clacton, which is coming up, like I said. He thought, I mean, this is the reports anyway. Him and his team thought that would basically call the investigation off, the parliamentary investigation, but it was paused, which means obviously when he wins, which he probably is going to win because he's going up against Count Binface and 30 other, 30 other candidates, which is just non-candidates because the other parties didn't want to run against him, and rightfully so because it's a circus. That it could well be suspended and trigger another by-election. So that's where we are. Nigel Farage is probably going to win Clacton by-election, going to get back into Parliament. The investigation is going to continue, and there's a strong likelihood that there may be another by-election. Meanwhile, he's slipping in the polls. He wants to be Prime Minister. He wants to be running into a general election in a few years' time. Strong. Is anyone going to forget this? Is anyone going to? I mean, probably will, the way how fickle we are. But like, he is running in a by-election against a man dressed as a bin. That's where we are. That's what we're doing right now. Like, credibility wise, and I think that's partly down to why he slipped in the polls. I think there's the corruption stuff. I think there's the £5 million backhanders, and I think there's just like this maybe the stuff around how he seems to not particularly deal with female TV presenters in interviews and stuff the same way as he does. The listen, love, you try and also ever so hard, that sort of thing. And also the £5 million backhanders. People don't like it, man. People do not like that. There's opinion polls about he's literally like the least favoured party leader as well. I'll drop these things in. So you can see as you're watching. But it's crazy. It's crazy, and I just hope that people are starting to see Nigel Farage for what he is, because he doesn't care. He doesn't care about working people, right? You can say what you want about Labour, say what you want about the Green Party, say what about any. Look, he is just so obviously out for himself. It's so obvious he's out for himself. not, I don't see any of the policies that he's talking about actually wanting to benefit people. It's all just about like gaining voters and being. It just comes across as so sleazy, man. So sleazy. But yeah, so he's dropping in the polls. Andy Burnham on the rise as well with the Labour Party. So highest, I think the reform or the lowest that they've been since, I think some of the polling actually put reform in third, but behind the Tories. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the two-party politics being over. Doesn't really seem like that might be the case, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, the polls on the top and bottom of everything, by the way. It's an indicator. But if Andy Burnham wants to stay where he is and Labour want to stay where they are, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. You know, it's not. There's a long way to go, and there's tax rises coming. There's all sorts of stuff, all sorts of challenges. Even the stuff that I've just been talking about there with the North Sea. There's a massive decision to be made. Do you grant new licenses? Do you not grant new licenses? Either way, someone's going to be annoyed. That's going to affect rains. So big conversations to be had, especially with the backdrop of such obvious, evident man-made climate change. Very difficult decision to go drill more oil and gas. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one, but we'll keep our eyes peeled on that. So yeah, the by-election's in a couple of days now, and we'll just see how it goes, I suppose. No doubt we'll see Farage back as an MP. Did anybody in Clacton miss him? Did anybody realise he wasn't there? Did anybody realise he wasn't in Parliament? Because, I mean, he barely goes in to vote. He barely turns up in Parliament, ever. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about the people of Clacton. So, yeah, we'll just see what happens. But I'll try and make some more. Do us a favour. Drop us a little subscribe. It makes a massive difference. If you've watched this, boom, go hit the subscribe. Goes a long way. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you soon for another episode of Cuppa with Craig. I hope you've enjoyed it. See you all later.